My friends, as we begin this time of meditation and spiritual unfoldment, let us come to a place of inner stillness, not the stillness that is forced by effort, nor the stillness that is achieved by technique, but the quiet that arises naturally when we lay down our struggle to reach God and simply allow ourselves to be present. For too long, our spiritual lives have been overshadowed by the belief that God is somewhere outside of us, that God is a being to whom we must call, cry, plead, and petition. We have been sincere in this approach. We have come with genuine longing, with earnest desire, and yet, in spite of that sincerity, there remains a burden, a sense of separation, a sense of distance between ourselves and the very source we seek. It is this burden, this unconscious belief in separation, that has made prayer seem like labor and spirituality seem like effort. We have imagined that if we could only pray hard enough, long enough, or correctly enough, God would hear us and respond. But, you see, the moment we believe that God is someone who must be awakened to our need, we have already stepped outside the kingdom. We have already accepted the central illusion that God is there and we are here, and between the two lies a distance to be crossed. Today, we enter a different kind of prayer. Not the prayer that seeks to reach God, but the prayer that recognizes God as the very life of our being. A prayer that does not attempt to draw God nearer, because God has never been distant. A prayer that does not ask for things, because the infinite, being infinite, withholds nothing. Our purpose in this hour is not to improve our outer circumstances, but to dissolve the belief that we live a life apart from God. In this recognition, the burden lifts. In this recognition, we stop striving and we begin to rest. So let us move gently, without haste, into the understanding that spiritual living does not begin with reaching outward, but with awakening inward. Here, within ourselves, behind the thoughts, behind the fears, behind the human sense of identity, is the presence that has been our life from the beginning. To discover this is the beginning of true prayer and the end of the long attempt to make God give us the things we believe we lack. As we move deeper, let us look gently and honestly at why so much of what we call prayer seems to fall short of its promise. It is not that God withholds. It is not that God sometimes answers and sometimes refuses. The infinite cannot give in portions, for the infinite is whole, complete, and indivisible. The problem lies not in God's response, but in the premise from which we pray. When we pray for things, whether it be healing, supply, harmony, or peace, we are silently affirming that these things are absent. We are declaring, without realizing it, I stand outside the fullness of God, and I must persuade God to bring me into it. The very request affirms the very lack. And so the prayer begins not from truth, but from illusion. Consider this. If we ask God for health, we are admitting a belief in a life separate from the one, life that is God. If we ask for supply, we are accepting in our consciousness the possibility of lack in the infinite. If we ask for protection, we are affirming that there is something from which God's presence is not already our refuge. You see, the request itself is the barrier. The prayer built upon separation cannot reveal oneness, and the prayer built upon lack cannot reveal completeness. This does not mean that our needs are unimportant or that our struggles are unnoticed. It means that the way we approach them must be transformed. Every prayer of asking, no matter how devout, begins with the assumption that God is somewhere else and must be brought into our experience. But God is not brought anywhere. God is the very substance and activity of the consciousness that is listening at this moment. So long as we pray from the sense of a self, apart from God, we will find our prayers circling the same concerns, the same fears, the same emergencies. And though temporary relief may appear, the deeper hunger remains unfulfilled. When we pray for things, we are working at the circumference, never touching the center. It is at the center where the sense of separation dissolves that true spiritual healing begins. The failure of petitionary prayer, then, is not a failure of God, nor a failure of faith. It is simply the natural consequence of beginning on the wrong premise. The mistake is not moral, it is metaphysical. When we start with separation, we end with struggle. When we begin with oneness, even before any appearance changes, we find peace, the peace that precedes and produces the harmony that follows. And so, before we ask for anything, let us pause. Let us recognize that the seeking itself may be rooted in the belief that God has yet to be found. Prayer fails, not because God is silent, but because we have prayed from a consciousness that has forgotten where God is closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, the one life expressing as this life. Let us now turn to the great truth upon which all spiritual unfoldment rests. It is a truth so simple that the intellect overlooks it, and so profound that the heart, once awakened to it, is never the same. When the Master said, "I and the Father are one," he was not speaking as a man apart from other men. He was revealing the nature of reality itself. He was declaring the truth of his being, the truth of your being, the truth of all being. But notice what he did not say. He did not say, "I will become one with the Father," or "I am trying to be one with the Father." He did not say, "Through effort, discipline, or virtue, I shall one day attain union." No, he spoke from the quiet authority of spiritual fact. I and the Father are already one. Oneness is not the goal, it is the foundation. It is not the destination, it is the starting point. This oneness is not the union of two separate beings joining hands. It is the realization that there is only one being expressing as individual form. The I that Jesus referred to was not the personal sense of self, the carpenter's son, the teacher walking the hills of Galilee. The I was the infinite consciousness that appeared as that individual identity, the same consciousness appearing as you and as me. Therefore, when we speak of oneness, we are not uplifting the human personality. We are recognizing the divine essence behind the personality. To grasp this truth is to understand why praying for things has no place in spiritual living. If you and the Father are one, what could you lack? What could you request? What could be added to the fullness of God expressed as you? Every desire to get, to achieve, to acquire is born of forgetting this oneness. And every moment of recognition dissolves that desire, for in the light of oneness, the soul sees that it has never been without anything. This realization cannot be forced. It does not come through intellectual repetition or metaphysical argument. It dawns softly, gently, like a sunrise breaking through the mist of centuries-old belief. And when it dawns, even faintly, you feel a shift, an easing of the burden, a dissolving of the fear, a quiet assurance that requires no evidence and seeks no validation. To accept I and the Father are one is to step out of the mental picture of yourself as a separate being striving to reach God. It is to rest in the truth that God is the very life living you. In this awareness, prayer becomes not a request, but a recognition, not an effort to change outer conditions, but a yielding to the truth that stands behind all conditions. As we continue, let this truth settle into your consciousness. There is no place where God ends and you begin. There is no life apart from the life that is God. There is only the one expressing itself as the many, and the many awakening to their oneness with the one. As we proceed, let us look more deeply into an area that has caused much confusion for earnest seekers: the desire to demonstrate supply, to demonstrate healing, to demonstrate harmony. Many approach the spiritual path with the hope that by learning the right principles or practicing the correct techniques, they may bring about the conditions they desire. But, my friends, the moment we attempt to use truth to accomplish some personal objective, we have stepped outside the realm of spiritual awareness and returned to the mental world of cause and effect. Joel Goldsmith often said, "Do not try to demonstrate supply, health, or harmony. Let the Father demonstrate itself as these things." This statement confounds the human mind because the mind wants a method, a guarantee, a process by which it can secure what it believes is missing. But spiritual living reveals that nothing is missing. It is only our recognition that has been absent. Supply is not something God gives. Supply is God expressing. Health is not a condition God restores. Health is the nature of the life that God is. Harmony is not the result of divine intervention. Harmony is the unchanging character of the presence that fills all space. When we attempt to demonstrate, we are subtly affirming the belief that God must act upon a situation that currently stands outside divine order. Yet how can anything be outside divine order? If God is infinite, where is the place where God is not? If God is all, what could exist that God has not already filled with its own nature? You see, the attempt to demonstrate arises from the belief in two powers: the power of God on one hand, and the power of disease, lack, or discord on the other. The moment we struggle to bring God's power into a situation, we have unknowingly accepted the reality of the opposing power. True spiritual realization begins when we release the desire to manipulate appearances, even spiritually. We do not use truth, we yield to truth. We do not command God, we consent to God's activity. We do not attempt to reshape the outer world. We recognize the invisible perfection already present and allow it to reveal itself. In this surrender, a great freedom dawns. The pressure to fix, to heal, to manifest dissolves. The weight of personal responsibility falls away. We stop attempting to direct life according to the wishes of the human self and start witnessing how the infinite expresses its own nature as our experience. This is why demonstrations fail when sought personally. They begin with the assumption that we, through spiritual understanding, can reshape reality. But spiritual consciousness does not reshape reality, it reveals reality. The kingdom of God is not created through our efforts, it is unveiled through our recognition. Therefore, let us set aside every attempt to force outcomes, even in the name of truth. Let us become still enough to feel the gentle movement of the Father within, expressing itself as the form, the function, and the fulfillment appropriate to each moment. When the Father demonstrates itself, the result is always harmonious, always sufficient, always complete, and requires no strain of our own. Now let us move into one of the most liberating realizations on the spiritual path, the distinction between living by effort and living by grace. As long as we function from the belief that we are separate individuals, responsible for shaping, sustaining, and correcting our lives, we will find ourselves caught in endless struggle The personal self, believing itself to be the actor and the achiever, labors constantly to secure good, avoid harm, and maintain control. Yet, no matter how sincere the attempt, the burden grows heavier, not lighter, for the human mind can never escape the limitations it believes in. Grace, in contrast, is not something to be attained. It is the natural activity of the infinite, when the personal sense of self is out of the way. Grace flows effortlessly, not because God suddenly acts, but because we stop obstructing the divine activity that has been present all along. The Father's life is forever expressing itself, but it appears as struggle when filtered through the belief in personal responsibility, and it appears as harmony when recognized as the only life there is. Let us look quietly at the difference. Effort asks, "What must I do to make this right?" Grace whispers, "Be still and let the truth reveal itself." Effort analyzes, plans, calculates, and fears the consequences of choosing wrongly. Grace unfolds with an inner assurance that does not depend on reason. Effort prays to bring God into the situation. Grace knows that God is the situation, its substance, its intelligence, its life. The one who lives by effort attempts to direct the course of events. The one who lives by grace becomes the transparency through which divine wisdom acts of its own accord. This is not passivity, it is not resignation, it is the highest form of activity, because it is the activity of God expressing through the individual consciousness that no longer assumes authorship. The human mind believes that unless it is pushing, nothing is happening. But in truth, it is precisely this pushing that blocks the gentle movement of spirit. When we cease trying to govern life by personal will, the divine will, ever present, ever intelligent, begins to guide, unfold, and accomplish. Consider the areas of your life where you have struggled the most. Perhaps you have tried with great intensity to secure financial stability, to improve your health, to restore harmony in your relationships, or to find your purpose. In each case, notice how the effort itself carried within it a sense of fear, fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of insufficiency. Such fear is not the nature of God. It is the echo of the belief that the self must accomplish something through its own strength. But listen quietly within. The infinite does not strain. The infinite does not worry. The infinite does not struggle to bring about its own expression. And because you and the Father are one, the life that is living you is the same effortless, harmonious, self-sustaining life. To live by grace is to trust this. Life to trust that. It knows how to appear as supply, as health, as right action, as fulfillment. As you begin to relax your reliance on personal will, something shifts. There is a softening within. You feel a release, as though a great weight has been taken from your shoulders. You discover that you are no longer driving life forward, but allowing life to unfold. You begin to sense intuitively what to do next, not through fear or pressure, but through an inner prompting that feels natural and true. And as you follow this quiet guidance, you realize that the Father, this infinite presence, is indeed living your life, expressing its own nature as your experience. This is living by grace, and it is the way of all who truly know their oneness with God. Now we come to a point that lies at the very heart of spiritual healing and spiritual unfoldment. If we understand this clearly, many of the frustrations that have accompanied our attempts at prayer and practice will melt away. Every condition we face, whether it appears as sickness, lack, conflict, or fear, does not begin in the outer realm. It begins as a mental image, a concept held in consciousness about who we are and what our life is. The outer appearance is merely the shadow cast by this inner image. Goldsmith often said that we are not healed of sickness, we are healed of the belief in sickness. We are not supplied with money, we are freed of the belief in lack. We are not rescued from discord. We are lifted out of the belief that we live in a universe of opposing forces. The change is never in the outer picture. It is always in the shift of consciousness that dissolves the picture's seeming reality. Let us look gently at this. When a person sees themselves as a frail physical being, vulnerable to disease, subject to chance, the body begins to reflect that mental image. When one sees themselves as a separate self, responsible for producing their own good, the outer world mirrors the burden of that belief, struggle, anxiety, insecurity. When one sees themselves as inadequate, unworthy, or unloved, life will faithfully present situations that seem to confirm that view, not because it is true, but because the mental image acts as the lens through which experience is interpreted. But when we realize even faintly, I and the Father are one, the mental image of a separate and limited self begins to dissolve. Something loosens within us. The picture of ourselves as weak, fearful, or lacking cannot stand in the presence of the truth that our life is the life of God. It is not the human mind forcing itself to believe something new. It is the dawning recognition of what has always been true, now breaking through the clouds of old conditioning. This is why spiritual effort, affirmations, and mental will cannot bring lasting change. We may attempt to overlay a positive image upon a negative one, but the deeper sense of separation remains untouched. We may tell ourselves that we are prosperous or healthy, yet still feel the fear that these conditions may slip away at any moment. But the moment we release the entire mental picture of a self apart from God, the need for these affirmations disappears. We do not try to improve the false image. We release it altogether in the light of oneness. Dissolving the mental image does not require force. It requires recognition. When a shadow is recognized as a shadow, the fear disappears not because we fought the darkness, but because we saw through it. In the same way, when the appearance of sickness is seen as the shadow of a belief in separation, we no longer fear the appearance. When lack is recognized as the shadow of believing ourselves to be our own source, we rest in the awareness that God is the only source and is forever expressing. When conflict is seen as the shadow of living from a dualistic mindset, we rise into the consciousness where only one operates. The outer world may still present the old forms for a time, just as a bell continues to ring after it is struck, but the consciousness behind the appearance has already changed. And as consciousness changes, the outer reflection inevitably shifts, not by our effort, but by the natural activity of truth. So let us not waste energy trying to repair the picture. Let us turn instead to the light that dissolves the picture. Let us recognize that the true self never needed healing, never lacked supply, never fell out of harmony. It is the mental image that suffered, and the mental image that dissolves as we awaken to our oneness with the infinite. This inner shift, quiet, gentle, unnoticed by the world, is the beginning of freedom. Now that we understand the nature of the mental image and its dissolution, let us turn to what may be called the living of truth, the quiet, continuous recognition of our oneness with the infinite throughout the day. Spiritual understanding does not remain in the realm of theory. It must become a living awareness, present in the small moments as well as in the great ones. And this awareness does not come through effort or discipline. It unfolds naturally when we turn gently again and again to the truth of our being. In the morning, before thought has gathered its momentum, there is a precious moment of openness. In that moment, Let us not begin the day by asking for guidance, protection, or supply, for the Father has already gone before us. Instead, we rest for a few breaths in the simple recognition that I and the Father are one. This recognition does not require words. It is an inner feeling, a soft awareness of the presence that lives us. Without trying to shape the day, we acknowledge that the infinite is expressing itself as every activity that will unfold. This subtle shift of consciousness transforms the entire day, not by rearranging circumstances, but by aligning us with the divine rhythm. As the day moves forward, life will present its usual tasks, conversations, decisions, unexpected challenges. In these moments, the human mind wants to take over, to react, to defend, to control. It is precisely here that the practice of recognition becomes the bridge between truth and experience. We pause, even briefly, not to find an answer, but to remember that the answer already exists within the infinite that is our consciousness. We do not seek to solve the problem. We remember that the problem has no reality in God, and therefore no power over the one who abides in oneness. Whether in traffic, or in a meeting, while washing dishes or walking through a difficult moment, the invitation is always the same. Turn inward, feel the presence. Remember who lives your life. This practice of the presence, as Goldsmith called it, is not a technique to improve the outer world. It is the recognition of the inner world, the true world, from which all appearances flow. The more often we rest in this recognition, even for a few seconds at a time, the more our consciousness becomes attuned to the gentle movement of grace. Things that once agitated us begin to lose their power. Situations that once frightened us become opportunities to witness the activity of the infinite in ways we could not have imagined. This recognition also transforms how we engage with others. As we remember our oneness with God, we begin to sense that the same presence lives as every person we meet. The sharp edges of judgment soften. The impulse to take offense diminishes. We realize that we are not interacting with separate selves, but with expressions of the same divine life. This awareness brings harmony not through effort, but through the natural influence of spiritual vision throughout the day. Then we return not by force, not by ritual, but with gentle noticing to the truth of our being. There is no prescribed number of times to practice. There is no requirement to maintain unbroken concentration. The important thing is simply to turn again and again to the inner light that is always present. Each turning clears away a layer of the old mental image and allows the reality of our oneness to shine through. As this recognition becomes the quiet background of our daily living, we find that life begins to unfold with increasing ease and harmony, not because we have prayed for things, but because we have aligned ourselves with the source from which all good naturally flows. As we move further into this truth, we begin to sense that spiritual living is not something we do, but something we permit. Life, when rightly understood, is not the personal endeavor of an isolated self. It is the continuous outpouring of the infinite, expressing its own nature in infinite forms. The human sense of life imagines that it must direct, govern, and control its experience. But the spiritual sense of life recognizes that there is a divine rhythm, an inner movement, already established, already complete, and that our role is simply to allow it to reveal itself. This unfoldment is gentle. It does not announce itself with fanfare or dramatic signs. It comes quietly, like the dawning of light at daybreak. At first, we may not notice that anything has changed. The outer conditions may appear the same, the responsibilities unchanged, the circumstances familiar, yet within there is a subtle shift. The desire to hurry diminishes. The need to force outcomes loosens. We begin to notice that decisions arise with greater simplicity, that answers come without strain, that the path forward seems to open of itself. This is not the result of personal achievement, it is the natural activity of grace. When we no longer insist on directing life from the standpoint of the personal mind, we make space for the infinite to act. And as the infinite acts, it expresses its own intelligence as our intuition, its own abundance as our supply, its own harmony as our relationships, its own peace as our emotional landscape. The human mind could not plan such outcomes, nor could it foresee the means by which they appear. But the infinite, functioning as our consciousness, knows how to take form in whatever way is needed. You may observe that opportunities arise without your seeking them. People come into your life who were never part of your plans. Solutions present themselves where previously there was confusion. All of this is the Father revealing itself as the form appropriate to the moment. Nothing forced, nothing strained, nothing achieved through effort, only the natural movement of spirit appearing in visible form. We often think of grace as something that comes to us, but in truth, grace is the activity of the one being moving through us. And when we stop resisting, when we relinquish the belief that we must manage every detail of life, that grace can flow unobstructed, in this flow, our actions become effortless, not because we are passive, but because they arise from an inner prompting that is wiser than thought, gentler than emotion, and surer than reason. There will be moments when appearances still try to assert themselves, moments of uncertainty, moments when the old mental images attempt to re-establish their influence. But as long as we remain anchored in the recognition that the infinite is living our life, we need not be disturbed. We do not fight the appearance, we look through it. We do not question whether the infinite is present. We rest in the knowing that it is the only presence there is. As this unfoldment continues, a remarkable assurance begins to take root, an assurance not based on circumstances, but on the inner realization that nothing can be added to or taken from the life that God is expressing. We begin to see that the form of good is secondary, the source of good is primary. And when we remain aligned with the source, the form naturally reflects the harmony of that alignment. This is the life lived by grace, a life in which the infinite expresses itself without interference, without obstruction, without the limitations imposed by the mental image of a separate self. When we allow this unfoldment, we discover that life has always been trying to express through us. Only our resistance kept us from recognizing it. Now, in the quietness of oneness, we simply accept what has always been true. And now, as we bring this period of contemplation to a close, let us return once more to the simplicity with which we began. All that we have explored together can be expressed in a single truth. The life you are living is the life of God, and the degree to which you experience harmony is the degree to which you yield to that life. There is nothing to be added, nothing to be achieved, nothing to be demonstrated. There is only the quiet recognition that all good already exists within the oneness of your being. The spiritual journey does not lead us somewhere outer. It leads us inward to the center where the presence abides. Here, in this still place, we discover that the search was never necessary, the struggle never required. The Father has been living our life all along. Each breath, each step, each moment has been the movement of the infinite expressing itself as us. Only the belief in a separate self obscured this truth. As we rest in this awareness, we begin to sense a profound relief. The burden of living, of managing, controlling, striving slips from our shoulders. We realize we never carried life. Life carried us. We never sustained ourselves. The infinite sustained us. And as this realization deepens, fear dissolves, because there is no longer a me who must protect itself, and no longer a world that can threaten what God is expressing. There is only the effortless activity of spirit, appearing moment by moment in whatever form is needed. Let this recognition accompany you into the hours ahead, not as a discipline, not as a demand, but as a gentle remembrance. Where I am, God is. And where God is, nothing is lacking. You need not hold this truth tightly. You need only allow it to be. Let it rise to the surface of consciousness whenever it will. Let it guide without force, comfort without effort, and reveal without your attempting to make revelation occur. Simply yield quietly, naturally, without strain to the presence that has been your life from the beginning. And as you walk through the world, know that you do not walk alone. The infinite walks as you. The Father expresses through you. The kingdom unfolds in you. This awareness is prayer. This awareness is peace. This awareness is the life lived by grace. We close now, not by ending the presence, but by resting in the assurance that it continues unbroken within us. And so, as we step back into the activity of the day, we carry with us the quiet confidence that the one who lives our life has already prepared the way.